Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Romero Salinas at Lincoln University. I work as an extension state specialist in small ruminant. And our team, Dr. Mohan Acharya and Gabriel Apple, Tenor Tipton, working here at Lincoln in extension. Welcome, everybody. And we are going to introduce our key speaker for today, Margaret Chamas, that she will be telling us a little bit who she is and all the experience that she has on dairy milk from small ruminant processing, but also in some other very interesting topics with the small ruminant. So welcome, Margaret.
Thanks for inviting me. Do you want me to just get started there?
Yes, please.
All right. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for coming. My name is Margaret, and I farm a little bit north of Kansas City. I wear a bunch of different hats depending on the day and depending on the time of day. And so today I'm putting on as much of a dairy hat as possible. I have dairy goats. I have a bunch of other goats as well. And while I'm not making a ton of money from the dairy side, I've dabbled in it, and I have enough of an understanding that I was willing to step in here and talk about some of those experiences. But really, what my strength is on the dairy side is more on the management and nutrition to get the good milk, and then figure out what to do with the milk after that. There's a lot of other people much better than me, but I've had some success. As Amaro mentioned, I have a couple of other hats. So my day job is working with Practical Farmers of Iowa. I'm the livestock viability manager, meaning I do a lot of technical assistance for producers, especially those doing any sort of grazing with livestock, and administering some of our programs, and then helping with our educational events. And then on my home farm, as well as my dairy goats, I have brush goats, meat goats that are used for targeted grazing purposes. And so that actually has been a really significant part of my income at various points. So managing the goats on pasture for brush and vegetation mitigation. So that's one of my passion areas. And actually, if any of you are attending the Southwest Missouri Spring Forage meeting tomorrow, I will be there talking about the targeted grazing stuff. I keep hearing a ding. Is that people coming in? Do you want me to wait another minute before sharing screen, or should we just get going? You're muted.
Let's start.
Okay, I'll get started. Folks, once I switch, I will still be able to see the chat, and so I will do my best to address questions that pop up in the chat. But any of our moderators, please flag me if I miss something, but I'll do my best to pay attention.
I'll try to stop you if there's ever a question that doesn't get.
I lost again.
Perfect. I appreciate that. All right. Can I get a thumbs up? Are we seeing the screen? We are seeing my slides. All right. We tested it once, but I wanted to make sure. So again, this presentation is simple home dairying because that's really my strength is kind of the basics. That's my farm email address and my farm website. Feel free to check those out, and I'll have those at the end. And my cell number. I have become one of the goat people, the crazy goat people in my area, and I'm happy to answer questions, troubleshoot nutrition and management problems for anyone dealing with sheep and goat or goat stuff mostly. So I did some of this intro. I am mostly a goat person. I appreciate sheep. I have a grand total of 2 right now. I definitely appreciate them, but my strength and most of my background is goats. And I've been in goats nearly 30 years now. Got started with a farm summer camp and then dairy goat 4-H, but I've worked with cattle doing a lot of grazing research. And like I said, I have a dairy herd that I still consider a hobby because they don't make me money, but they make me happy. And I breed, I register them, and I show them locally and nationally. But I take it seriously. I'm milking 20 goats right now. I have a large number of them. So it is really a pretty intense system. The nutrition and the management is really big to me, even though I'm not using this as a major source of income. And then my brush goats, it's a minor part of the farm right now, but they are doing a bit of on-farm research with them to figure out how to best manage certain species and getting to play around with virtual fence technology. I do make some of my own cheese and yogurt and things like that. Although most of the milk I produce on the farm goes back to the goat kids or bottle calves, things like that. So this is going to be a pretty cursory overview of home dairying, and most of this is going to be for personal use or, small local direct sales, less commercial. I've run a few analyses for farmers or prospective dairy farmers, and I can refer you to a bunch of folks who are doing this at scale, but I will best be able to speak about kind of the local, small scale, personal, or maybe, friends and family sort of use. This is going to describe what works best for me. This is my local climate, my local forage availability, my local feed availability. So take it all with a grain of salt and understand that while this might be a great place for you to start getting ideas from, it may not be what works best for you. And I'll never tell you that you're totally wrong. Once you start talking about selling and marketing milk, we get into, kind of a legal territory pretty quick. And so I'll mostly be talking about what I understand to be the case. But I want to put a blanket statement out there of check locally, check with your regulators first before you start marketing milk or dairy products broadly. Okay, basics of small ruminant dairying. So compared to cows, obviously sheep and goats are going to give us less milk, less volume of milk. But generally sheep, or goats especially, produce more milk relative to body weight compared to cows. They're more efficient from a per pound of body weight standpoint. So they can be advantageous in a lot of ways. Many individual families, small businesses, producers looking to sell on a small scale, probably don't need a dairy cow who's going to produce 8 to 10 gallons of milk a day. If you've ever started milking dairy goats, and you end up with 5 to 6 gallons of milk in your fridge, you quickly realize how fast this can get overwhelming. So dairy goats and dairy sheep are attractive because they're much more suited to the needs of most families or homesteaders or small communities. There's also advantages in terms of the milk composition. So goat milk and sheep milk is higher in components. And when we say components in the milk world, we're talking about fat, protein percent, things like that, kind of all the goodies that go into milk along with the water that make up what you would then turn into cheese. Sheep milk, especially if you look at this chart, has a ton of solids. So the solids is the total of the protein, the fat, lactose, and ash. So that'd be like your minerals, your calcium. Sheep milk has lots of solids, and so you get a high yield when you make cheese out of it. And all that fat you see, that nearly 8% fat on the ewe milk, it makes it taste really, really darn good and makes for phenomenal cheese. One big trick with small ruminants, though, compared to cattle, is that there's a lot less support for them. Lincoln University is one of the rare university extension systems that seems to really put a ton of emphasis and love into small ruminants. Usually they're very cursory because in vet schools, in research, there's not as much time, effort, and money put into small ruminants as there is into cattle and horses and hogs and other more commercial type livestock animals. So while getting a dairy goat or a dairy sheep might be a great option for a lot of reasons, just be aware if you're newer to livestock that you will end up hitting a lot of frustrating dead ends when it comes time to get veterinary care. It can be a bit of a struggle. So, quick overview of dairy goats versus dairy sheep and kind of guiding what might work best for you. So why dairy sheep? Like I said before, with those component levels, you get incredible ability to make really delicious cheeses. Some of my favorite cheeses are sheep milk cheeses. Because there's not many dairy sheep and because they have such rich milk, you can command a really high price for these items. It's a super specialty product. Some of the flip side of that is because they don't produce as much milk, even as much as goats, and they have generally short lactations. Something I can't speak to too much directly, but just from conversations with friends, you're looking at paying a bit more for good quality breeding stock because there's just fewer of them. So it's a more of a specialty animal. It's going to be a bit harder to find diverse bloodlines or quality bloodlines, and you're probably going to pay quite a bit more for them. There's also a challenge in equipment. So we've got milking machines that are suited for cows, suited for goats, suited for Nigerian dwarf goats. And some of them, but not all of them, work well on sheep. So you might have to MacGyver a few things to get a sheep dairy set up. The standard sheep dairy or dairy sheep lactation is going to be shorter than goats. So if you, with any dairy animal, the animal gives birth to offspring and starts producing more and more milk for the first maybe third of lactation before peaking and then slowly declining. Sheep get to that peak and then decline much quicker and usually are only going to be in milk for, what's that, 3 to 6, 7, maybe even 8 months. You can rebreed sheep a little bit more often than you can goats or cattle. But your lactations are going to be shorter and your production is going to be fairly limited. So this is part of what makes it such a high value product. There's just not a lot to go around, but just keep that in mind when you are, budgeting your time, your energy, and your milk for dairy sheep. Goats, meanwhile, are much more varied than sheep. So you have everything from your tiny Nigerian dwarf goats who produce, a relatively small amount of milk but high components, up to your Alpines and Sonnens, which produce a high volume of milk but lower components. You have a huge range of sizes, production levels, and component levels with your dairy goats. They still make fantastic cheese. And it still is a premium product, but not quite as staggeringly high value as sheep milk or sheep cheese. But you get more milk over a longer period of time. And the purchase price of stock is incredibly variable. So because there are people on milk tests who can talk about the genetics and have proof of that, you have animals that will go for hundreds or thousands of dollars as youngsters because they have records and pedigrees behind them. And you can also find fairly cheap, but still reasonably good quality dairy animals just because we're all breeding our goats to kid pretty much every year because we have to keep getting milk production. And so therefore, we're always generating more animals that we need to get rid of. So your standard dairy goat lactation is 305 days, and that's similar to cattle. That's what's used if you're keeping track in Dairy Herd Improvement Registry. If you're actually tracking lactations or doing milk testing, that's what's considered standard. On commercial dairies, it's much more common these days to have goats in milk for multiple years without taking a break and without kidding again. If you can keep the nutrition good, if you've got the right genetics, I've seen really phenomenal does who are 8 years old and have only kidded twice. They've done 4-year lactations and they're still producing, a gallon to 10 pounds a day. This trend toward extended lactations and the trend of yields varies a lot between breeds. So when I say standard breeds there, I'm talking about your standard size goats. So that's your Swiss breeds like your Alpines and your Sonnens, includes your Nubians, although they're kind of in between standard and miniatures. And it does include La Manchas as well. So on a lot of animals, you can get a 3,000 pound lactation. These animals will produce 8 to 10 pounds a day, so 8 pounds being about a gallon. And you're going to be looking at 3 to 6% butter fat. So remember that standard whole cow milk is 3.5% milk fat. So this is, cow milk or a bit better, but not over the top. Nigerian dwarves, your miniature dairy goats, much smaller lactations, much smaller goats, maybe half a gallon a day at peak. But they can achieve nearly 12% butter fat. So if you're looking for, just a little bit of milk for your homestead and you want, it to be the creamiest, best stuff to make some cheese, Nigerians might be the way to go. You just have to deal with teeny tiny little teats on the milking machine. So just keep that in mind. Okay, making good milk. I am a fanatic for animal management and animal nutrition, and so I had to kind of tone down how much I wanted to talk about this. So here are general strategies for milking and a little bit on feeding. One of the questions I get a lot from people who are first looking to get into dairy animals of some part. First is, gosh, milking twice a day seems like a lot of work, and it is. And if you're going to do this, high production dairy style, you are going to be milking twice a day. But the reality is there's a couple different ways you can do this to maybe not minimize work. Dairy is always work, but to moderate the amount of labor that goes into this. So your standard tactic is the first bullet point there. The goat or sheep has its babies, you pull them and bottle raise them or get rid of them, and then you're milking that animal twice a day. You get the most milk this way. You are the baby, you are the consumer of this milk, but you're doing all the work. A number of people will let the doe or ewe have its offspring, will let the dam raise those babies on its own, and then after weaning, 30 days for sheep, maybe 60 days, maybe up to a couple months with goats, then you pull the babies off, and then you as the human start, take over, you start milking. At this point, usually once you get to weaning age, you can milk only once a day if you want. So once a day milking, gives you not quite, or a little bit more than half as much milk as milking twice a day on average, but it halves the labor and it reduces feed costs. So you don't have as much work if you're letting the doe raise her kids or the ewe raise her lambs. You don't get as much milk either, but you're saving a lot of labor. And then an increasing number of people I find are doing what we sometimes call the milk share option. So the dam has her babies. You make sure they're well established on that dam, they're growing well. And then after the first week or two, you separate them for 12 hours a day. Oftentimes they're separated at night, they're in adjacent pens so they can see each other and sniff each other, but they're not in the youngsters cannot nurse. So that dam will fill up with milk. In the morning, you milk her out. That's some milk for you to take inside and make cheese or use. But then you let the dam and the babies back together during the day so they can continue nursing. So you don't have the labor of bottle feeding or milking twice a day, but you do at least get some milk. This is an increasingly popular compromise that I'm hearing from a lot of homesteaders, and even a number of people in kind of the show dairy world who just don't have the time to be milking twice a day and bottle feeding all these kids. Good milk is going to start with happy and healthy animals. There's a lot of truth to the fact that, I don't know if anyone remembers the old commercials like happy cows come from California. There's truth to good milk coming from happy cows, but happy cows can come from all over the country. Lactating is the greatest energy expenditure, the greatest nutrient demand that our ruminant animals will ever experience. And especially for these breeds that we've been selecting for peak milk production and component production and volume production, it is a huge metabolic drain. So your high producing dairy cows, it's the metabolic equivalent of them running a marathon every day. At least that's what they were telling me when I was in college, and that was long enough ago. It might even be like running a 50K per day. These animals are under a huge metabolic load, and to keep them running or milking happily and producing good quality milk, we need to make sure they have good quality feed. So what you're feeding these animals drives the milk yield, obviously, but it also influences the components and the flavor of the milk. And I think that's especially true with small ruminants, or at least it sure is with my goats. So your grain, your concentrate feeds, so whether that's your bagged feeds or your corn or soy hull pellets or something like that, I recommend that to keep production high. That's just calories. That's energy that they need to be putting into keeping their own weight on, into making milk fat, into all these other things. Forages actually are a big component of milk fat. The fiber in forage is broken down into the backbones of fat molecules. And I recommend good quality stored forages, even during the growing season, to keep consistent milk volume and flavor. One thing I have noticed, and this is particularly relevant for small ruminants, my goats love to eat brush and weeds. Heck, that's what I use some of my goats for. And so I used to let my dairy goats, meander part of my property. They'd go into the timberline a little bit. They had a little meadow they would go graze in. There was something that bloomed in my pasture about twice a season that made the milk so rank for about 3 days. It was so rank that the baby goats wouldn't even drink it. So I had starving baby goats and nasty milk for a few days. You'll find that even commercial dairies who promote the fact that their animals have access to pasture or meadows, these small ruminant dairies are still often bringing in good quality alfalfa hay and making sure these animals are filling up their bellies before they go nibble on brush and leaves, because we need to ensure this consistent quality flavor, especially for shipping milk and especially if you're making cheese. You can really whack around with the components or the flavors if you're letting them eat whatever they find. So as much as it takes away from our ability to use sheep and goats to some of their natural tendencies, if your priority is going to be on milk flavor, milk taste, and milk yield, I'd say stick to the consistent purchased feeds.
We have a quick question.
Certainly.
Are there sheep that can do extended lactation?
I am sure there are. I have listened to a couple extra webinars just prepping for this, and no one's able to give like a really consistent answer. I suspect that there are some of them out there, but even these people who are like operating commercial dairies on the sheep side, they're saying, nope, it's, 200 days, 240 days is about as much as you get. So it's the extended lactation in goats, at least, it's a combination of the nutrition, certainly, but just certain genetic lines. As soon as the daylight starts decreasing, they will drop production off and they may just shut themselves off. And so my guess is that these sheep breeds, no one's quite gotten to where they're selecting for the ones that don't respond to the daylight that much. Semi-educated guess there. So I'm not aware of a particular sheep or breed that does that. You may be able to find individual lines that have more extended lactations, but it does not seem to be an industry, doesn't seem to be common.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Another major component of making sure we still have good milk is udder health and udder quality. So the obvious thing we look out for is mastitis in milking animals. We want to avoid any clumps or lumps in the udder. We want to make sure we keep things sanitary. And some of the ways to keep doing that is clean udders, clean conditions. The usual steps that are recommended: pre-dip with some sort of antibacterial dip, so chlorhexidine, iodine. Clean that off, clean the animal's udder, fresh towels or fresh wipes for every animal. Make sure there's no dirt or mud or manure on it. Dip with an antiseptic again after milking. And then one thing, I have a question mark here because not everyone does it, and the recommendations seem to be all over the board: dry treating. So when the animal stops milking at the end of the season, kind of standard practice is to use an intramammary infusion of antibiotics into the udder, just as kind of an insurance, make sure that no bacteria colonize there now that you're no longer flushing the milk out every day. I've been listening to I've been doing a bit of extra research, and it sounds like the efficacy in goats, at least, is variable. I do it because to me it is kind of cheap insurance, but that's one of those. Think about it, think about your systems, find out what works well for you. Obviously, animals have been lactating and nursing and taking care of babies and never having teat dip for many, many millions of years before we ever domesticated them. So clearly they can do it without this, but to me, it's just one extra thing I can do to try and maintain the health of my animals' udders over the long term. And again, maintaining animal health is challenging with small ruminants. We fight against parasites, we fight against respiratory issues, especially here in Missouri. There's not many medications labeled for small ruminants, and that gets tricky because even if your veterinarian gives you a prescription to use on your animals, if there's no established withdrawal time before you can use the meat or milk again, you usually have a very extended withdrawal time. So your vet will have to consult with FARAD, which is the Food Animal Residue Avoidance. What does the D stand for? Basically, they will use what they know of the research and then add a big insurance area to say, okay, if you give this antibiotic, which isn't labeled for sheep and goats, you might have to wait a couple of weeks before you can use the milk from that animal again. So that makes it challenging to keep our animals healthy and to follow guidelines for drug residues.
We have a couple more questions. I hope that's okay.
Sure.
At what point do you inject the udder with the antibiotics? The day after you stop milking?
For me, at least, it is when I know that's going to be the last milking. I strip that animal out the very last time. I put the antibiotics up into the udder, massage it around, teeth them one last time, and then that ideally is it until the next time they freshen.
Okay, and this is not an injection. You're infusing, you're going into the teeth.
Correct. Yeah, it looks like a syringe with a big fat plastic blunt-ended or rounded end needle. So it functions like an injection in that you are sticking this quote unquote needle up into the teat orifice and then plunging the antibiotics into the udder. So it looks kind of like a syringe, but it's actually not an injection. And it goes into the udder, and actually just the way the immune system works and the circulatory system works, that antibiotic stays in the udder and only in the udder.
And then is this an antibiotic that you would need a VFD?
Since it's not one you're feeding, it is not one you need a VFD for, and at least at this point, because it's intramammary, it's okay. I think this might depend on your state. I have been able to order these antibiotics straight from a sales company, and I do not believe I've needed a prescription for it, but that may change. I don't think this is considered one of the major antibiotics of concern, though. So that would be one to double check.
Okay.
There are also a couple different medications used in this way, and penicillin is one of them that's been used at least in the past. Cefepime is the one I usually use. And that's not one I think you tend to ever give like orally or by injection. So I don't know that it's under the same restrictions.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. So when you are working with dairy animals, though, my biggest recommendations, when you are taking milk from the animal, keep it clean and keep it as simple and basic as possible. Use materials, so your pails, whatever you're milking into, use materials that you can clean and sanitize. Get milk from the animal into the fridge as quickly as possible. This is both a food safety thing, prevent, that nice warm milk full of sugars and fats and protein is a great place for good and bacteria to grow. And so the faster we can chill it to a point where bacteria can't grow, the better off we are. Also, at least compared to cow's milk, goat milk has enough natural enzymes in it that the fat and the protein will start changing as soon as it leaves the animal. And so the faster you chill it, the faster you stop that from happening, because it will change in generally not a great way. If you have ever worked on or been to a commercial cow dairy, they're usually milking the animals and you fill up a bulk tank and then they might ship that milk out, and milk might be turned into cheese or yogurt or whatever several days after it comes out of the animal. If you're doing especially like really kind of finicky goat cheeses, or you're doing ones that need to have a certain texture or consistency or flavor, you are making milk from your goats every day, because the milk will change the protein type, the fat kind of content or the structure by a few days later. So you have to get it from animal to final product a little bit more quickly with goats than you do with cattle. I assume, but don't know for sure, that sheep are similar to goats in that way. I also highly recommend straining milk. There are milk filter systems available that don't require, a whole like fancy pipe system. Strain that milk, because whether or not you're hand milking or you're machine milking, hairs and little bits of things end up in the milk, and that's really unappetizing if you're making cheese and discover that later. Be diligent about records. This is partially the medications you're giving the animals, but also notes about, did we change feed somewhere? Is that affecting the flavor? Like I said, it took me a while to figure out what that was making my milk so rancid, but I kind of figured it out eventually because I started recording. When were the goats going outside? When were they having access to these meadows? And that was what kind of clued me into what was causing the flavor issues. And wash your hands. This seems rudimentary, but I've been reading that some researchers found that hand washing was not a priority of a lot of people working in dairy farms. And then interestingly, farms that would have milkers wear gloves had almost more sanitation problems because people thought, oh, I have gloves on, my hands are clean. They weren't replacing the gloves often enough. So wash your hands or replace your gloves. Again, brief note on the legal-ish stuff. In the state of Missouri, at least, you can sell raw milk and cream directly off your farm to an end consumer. So I have people who come to my farm, they buy a gallon of milk from me. We are good to go without me needing any further licensing or processing or things like that. As I understand it, and again, I am not a legal expert, and I am certainly not an expert on Missouri's laws in particular, any further processing, like making cheese or yogurt or butter, would require grade A or grade B dairy classification and inspection. I do know for sure that doing kind of a herd share option or a milk CSA and having people, quote unquote, own part of your animal does not entitle them to be able to just claim dairy off of a farm. I did ask one of the food safety specialists about that specifically because that had been suggested to me as an option, and she reiterated that nope, that it does not work in the state of Missouri. So again, the long and short here is make sure you are aware of what the regulations are in your area. And while we all know that there are totally people everywhere who are making cheese and giving it to family and friends, you know, think about what you are doing and how comfortable you are with that and how comfortable you would be with other people finding out about it. I'm not going to tell anyone that they're right or wrong. Just think about it first. To give you some perspective, though, so grade A milk is milk that is going to be used for drinking itself. Grade B is generally like going to be turned into cheese or something else. But these are some of the testing requirements and the handling requirements for grade A milk. Cooled to 45 degrees Fahrenheit within 2 hours after being milk. And there's somatic cell count limits, coliform limits, and bacterial limits. If you're saying, gosh, I wouldn't even know how to find out about this, milk testing is available even for these components to the average consumer or the average, milk producer, but it costs money. And so it's probably worth doing a few times just to see how your own practices are handling up compared to what we're expecting from commercial producers selling milk to the public in general. Facilities regulations, though, get pretty persnickety. Floors of the milking area must be concrete or otherwise impervious, and that includes where the animals are hanging out. The walls need to be smooth and ceiling must be dust tight. No poultry and animal areas, and that's for a listeria risk. Your milk house can only be used for milking and dairy production, and it can't have an opening, like an open doorway to the animals. It has to be a door that can be closed tightly. You have to have hot and cold water plumbing and sinks. So the step to go up to grade A is a pretty big one. I think it's worth being aware of what the requirements are, just so as you're planning your own home dairy operation, you can think about, all right, what's the standard for cleanliness and why are some of these rules in place? What can I do, even a modicum of in my own operation to keep it as clean and keep food as safe as possible? My best bets. I am not a grade A dairy. I'll show you a picture of my operation, and it's totally not grade A. But things I think are important are milking somewhere that's not where the animals live. Keep that level of separation from the manure, from the dust, from the mud, from the flies, because there's flies. We know that. It's a thing. Use stainless steel or something similarly sanitizable for what you're milking into. And again, wash your hands thoroughly, wash the milking machines thoroughly, wash the buckets thoroughly. And think, would you be okay with your customers, your guests, seeing everything on the farm? The idea behind direct sales being allowed is because the idea is a consumer can come onto your operation, see exactly what you're doing, and decide for themselves whether they think it's safe, whether they want to consume the products produced there. So keep that in mind as you're prepping your milk area and your livestock. This is my milk setup. It is totally not grade A. That's a sweepable floor, but not really an impervious sanitizable floor. And I have wood milk stands. That totally wouldn't pass muster. I'm okay with that because, like I said, most of my milk goes back to animals or for my own use. I do try and keep things such that the milk is set back a bit from the animals. My milking machine is pretty tightly secured. I have udders clipped and they get nicely cleaned off before every milking. So again, it's a level that I feel comfortable with, and I'm very comfortable with showing people who come onto the farm. My best bets on equipment, and I realize I'm running long, so I'll start hurrying up. My favorite milking equipment, or some of the things I've found really nice. These milking inflations are called the Top Flow Z, and this is not me trying to promote specific companies, but I like these because if the animal kicks them off, the vacuum is cut off. You're not going to accidentally suck up manure or hair or dust or anything like that. So that's a nice feature of these, even though they're ridiculously expensive, and not the easiest to maintain. I like the fact that I know that if I get an ornery animal who kicks them off, that they're not going to, inhale any manure. I love stainless steel milking kits. That's one from Caprine Supply. That stainless steel strip cup, the filter, the bucket, everything there, nice and simple. And I don't use regular dairy wipes or I don't want to do a load of laundry every day. So I clean my udders with unscented baby wipes. I get them by the 1,200 count. And that's just worked well for me. Okay, you're here for cheese, I hope. And so let's get to cheese. A note on pasteurization. Some people pasteurize, some people don't. And that's a decision. Sorry, Gabriel,
Sorry,
question.
can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah, where is the line between biosecurity precautions and permitting customers to observe your milking practices?
That is a great question. And so I know that in a licensed inspected dairy where cheese making is happening, there's going to be a lot more steps involved. So when I've toured those dairies, it's the booties, it's, you start at the dirtiest end, or it start at the cleanest spot and then walk, can only go one direction. If and this is my personal take on it, if you're going to sell raw milk off of your property, you better be comfortable with someone coming and seeing anything and everything. And so I do invite people to come and watch the milking process. They don't necessarily get to help, but they can stand in the barn with me and see what happens because they are trusting me with a food product that, if handled wrong, can be a serious health hazard. And so I want them to be able to get as up close and personal as they want. Biosecurity, though, yeah, they are not helping with the milking process. They are standing back. Depending on the situation, they may be wearing booties, or I have a disinfectant that we can spray on their footwear before they come on. But again, it's less about you must allow people to come watch you, more of keep that mindset in place. Don't do anything you wouldn't be comfortable with them seeing. And while I don't think anyone would balk at the idea of, hey, I'm concerned about biosecurity on my farm. If you're going to tell people, no, you're not allowed to come watch, that might raise red flags for them. Does that mostly answer the question? Yeah, spraying fight back on people's shoes, hoping for the best. Oh, I finally figured out how to find the chat. Fight back is a good one. Iodine's actually supposed to be better than fight back for a number of reasons. I'm actually switching back to iodine instead of chlorhexidine-based teat dip. Virkon is my disinfectant of choice for spreading on people's boots, at least. I spelled that out in there. That one's pretty intense. Vets have recommended it to me for a number of disinfectant reasons, and so that's what I use on people's boots when they come visit. All right, pasteurization, again, kind of a personal choice. Some people do it, some people don't. I am pasteurizing almost everything now for biosecurity reasons, or inter-herd biosecurity reasons, CAE prevention and CAE protocols for my kids. So everyone decide that on their own. Pasteurization is a combination of the amount or degree of heat applied and the duration of heat. And so there's a couple different levels that are established. I was actually unable to find what Missouri's rules officially state is pasteurized or not. So the temperature ranges I list here are the things that I grew up hearing, that I have heard documented in other places, but I don't know if they're official, Missouri law necessarily. Heat treating is what we use for colostrum, because if you get too much heat onto colostrum, you'll denature all the immunoglobulin proteins and make it turn into pudding. And that's 135 Fahrenheit for 60 minutes. So this has been found to adequately kill the pathogens, but not denature all the good proteins and the immunoglobulins. Your kind of standard pasteurization that I operate with most of the time, get the milk up to 165 Fahrenheit for about 30 seconds. When you see like ultra high temperature pasteurization, so if you see like shelf stable milk, like those little like half and half packets, on like an airplane or at conference centers, those can stay at room temperature because they've been heated so much, 195 degrees, it's basically scalding, that they're essentially sanitized. Most of us probably don't need that, probably don't want that, but that may become of use to some folks. And if you're going to pasteurize, kind of the simple home recommendation is use a double boiler. So pot of water, heat that up, and then have the milk in a separate container inside of that water. Similarly, I have a couple of pasteurizer machines now that operate similarly. So there's a kind of water jacket surrounding the milk, which is in its own container. I wouldn't recommend direct heat. I mean, it's better than nothing. The milk will get heated up, but you'll find you get a scum of milk proteins kind of cooked onto the side of your cooking instrument.
Margaret,
Yes.
you want for me to put the first one of the polls talking about the pasteurization?
Sure.
Okay, I will go. I think this is the question. Okay, so for the people to be answering, and you can give some feedback. What is not a valid pasteurization and not valid pasteurization? Okay, the people start answering. Okay, we have more than almost 60% of the people that answer.
Yep, most people have it. So that 145 degrees for 30 minutes is not one of the protocols that I've learned as a legitimate pasteurization. So remember that the option A, 135 for 60 minutes, that's the heat treating. So that is generally considered to be adequate, especially when we're talking about feeding back to animals. Option C, the 195 degrees for 1 second, that's our ultra high temperature. So that is the, scalded almost to nothingness option that we would use for shelf stable milk. 165, option D, 165 degrees for 30 seconds. That's kind of the basic standard one that I think a lot of homesteaders or people doing this in their home, that's what they use, and that's a number of commercial operations as well. I know when I got my pasteurizer, that was one of the kind of setups that went with it. So the correct answer for the not valid pasteurization is 145 for 30 minutes. All right, on to cheese. So milk is a suspension of fat and protein in a liquid. It is not a uniform solution of these particles. It's teeny tiny little protein blobs and fat globules, roughly evenly suspended through liquid. So when you get milk that hasn't been homogenized, it settles out. That is the suspension becoming less uniform. The fat globules rise to the top, everything else kind of hangs out at the bottom. When we're making cheese or yogurt or kefir, but cheese especially, we are saying we don't necessarily need all this water. We want just the protein, just the fat, just some of the calcium. So we are condensing those solids and separating them from the liquids. There's two main ways to do that. We can do that with acids and heat, or we can do that with bacteria and enzymes. In the end, they operate somewhat similarly, but we are basically forcing chemical reactions that cause the protein and the fats to clump up and separate out away from the rest of the water. So to put it in nursery rhyme terms, that is Miss Muffet's curds and whey. A little bit more about the science. So your acid cultured cheese, the premium example of that, or the easy example, is ricotta cheese. So you heat the milk up, that starts to cause some changes in the protein molecules, kind of connections to each other. And then you add that acid that causes them to very quickly coalesce, clump together, and separate out from the whey. Bacterial cultured cheese is a little bit more complicated. So we add specific types of bacteria or enzymes to the milk that proliferate and then create their own acids that then help separate out the solids from the rest of the suspension. And some of the enzymes they'll create will do some further digestion of certain types of protein and fat molecules that kind of contribute to this as well. You get more flavor nuance with your bacterial cultured cheeses because over the millennia we as society have started picking specific cultures that make tastes or textures that we really like. But these are the two main methods of cheese creation. Like I said, specific types of bacteria will determine the texture and taste of the cheese. They're also, they're just breaking down the components of that milk into things that precipitate out of it. Specifically, so they'll take lactose, which is the milk sugar, and turn it into lactic acid, which lowers the pH, creates some of that tang, and then that acidic nature is part of what causes separation of the other solids. So some more on bacterial and enzyme cultured cheese. So one of the big things these days is making sourdough bread, and most people start with sourdough starters, which is great. Other people will say, oh, you just kind of get your mixture of flour and sugar and whatever, and just let it set. And there's natural yeast and bacteria in the air that will settle in there and create their own. That is true. And that can work with creating cheese or yogurt as well. There are a lot of the bacteria that are going into making cheese or yogurt came from the environment. And so if you're lucky, you might have some environmental bacteria that make delicious cheese, or you might not. I've made some sit cheese, just, leave the jar of milk on the shelf, see what happens. Some of it's been good. I've got some yogurt in the fridge that was totally an accident. And some of it's been really nasty. I would recommend, especially at first, buy cultures of cheese, buy packets of cultures that will give you the bacteria you want until you get a bit more confidence and are willing to take some risks like that. It's just easier and a bit more safe to just start with something set like this. There's two main types of cultures. The thermophilic ones like hotter types of milk. So this is your yogurt cultures, and this is certain other types of cheese. They require a bit higher temperature for them to proliferate, for them to make more and more bacteria and to make acids and to digest the milk proteins. And then there's a number of cultures that want the milk warm but not hot. And so that's the temperature at which they're happy. We want the milk to be at specific temperatures for a specific amount of time to allow the desired bacteria to grow and exclude other bad bacteria. So this is part of the idea behind preserving milk via making it into cheese. We are setting up a situation where the good organisms are able to exist and the bad ones cannot. There are some other ingredients that you may see recipes call for in cheese. These are often not required, but they can help. So calcium chloride will help firm up the curd of some types of cheese. Lipase is an enzyme that will break down the fats and might be used to enhance flavor. Certain types of cheese, so your blue cheeses, your bries, you need to add certain mold cultures or spores to get that characteristic flavor or rind. And rennet is another one you hear a lot of times is as part of a basic cheese. That is the enzyme in ruminant stomachs or animal stomachs that allows the neonatal animal to digest milk and to precipitate out the proteins. And that is used sometimes to help break down the curd in certain types of cheese. The basic steps of cheese making: get the milk, get it to the right temperature, pasteurize if you want, again, that's a decision you get to make, and then add your cultures or your acids. So again, we need the milk at the right temperature first to get the environment right for our bacteria. Then we add those, and then we keep it at the proper temperature, allowing those bacteria or the acids to do their thing. Then we separate the curds and whey, usually using cheesecloth. And then after that, sometimes you're eating the cheese directly. Sometimes you're going to be pressing it to remove more whey or aging it or waxing it. This all depends on the ultimate type of cheese you are making.
What about the next poll?
Let's go for the next question.
Okay, I think it's this one. What are the two main methods to culture milk for cheese making?
All right. While they answer that poll, I just wanted to announce the winners of our raffle from last week. And since this is our last webinar, I'm also gonna announce the winner for this week. I did the attendance and did a random draw for that while we were going. So from last week, our winner is going to be Miss Tina Skiver. And for this week, our winner will be Miss Jolie Russell. So congratulations. I'll be sending you two emails sometime tomorrow, and we can get you your books for winning the raffle today.
And I'm seeing in the comments or in the questions, whoever DS is says, when it comes to developing a consistent result with quote unquote wild cultures, pH testing milk before setting it helps get a more easily replicated result. Yes, absolutely. And I will say that is totally a thing that I know exists and I haven't done. But yeah, milk changes throughout a lactation. Like we said, it changes also with their nutrition and what they're eating and if they're heat stressed or anything like that. So pH testing is one of the things that can affect cheese set and culture and curd set. So pH testing the milk would be a really good way to start tracking cause and effect, essentially. pH of the milk is this. DS, if you have any idea what like a good range of pH is for milk, that would be good. And is that testing okay before setting? I wonder if there's an ideal after setting. 5 to 5.4 for melty cheese. Thank you so much. See, again, I have dabbled in all this, but I'm not the be all end all. Okay, results in from the second question. The two main methods to culture milk into cheese. The correct answer is D, acids and bacteria. Really, it's acids/heat and the bacteria. Rennet and heat, pretty much close enough. The heat is not the main thing that separates the curds and whey, though. The heat would eventually kind of separate it out, but you really need that acid to make proper cheese. Lipases is one of the enzymes involved, but a lipase alone is not going to get our real cheeses that we're after. And then rennet and enzymes, rennet is an enzyme. So what we're missing in option A is that acid and the heat. All right, so finished basic steps of cheese making. These are some of my favorite cheese making tools. That clip-on thermometer, that's from New England Cheese Making Company. Clips nicely onto the side of the bowl, helps you read the temperature. Wonderful, super handy thing, worth the money for it. You can use a meat thermometer, but they usually don't have a handy clip like that. And the temperature gauge is usually, or the temperature range is usually quite a bit different. Also from New England Cheese Making Company on the far right, that slotted spoon is great for lifting and scooping curds out of a whatever container you're making your cheese in. And the bowl in the middle, it seems really, really simple and kind of silly, but a nice round-sided bowl, very deep. So not like wide and shallow, but even deeper than that would be ideal, and flat on the bottom. That way it will sit nicely if you are double boiling milk to heat it up. And you can also just pull it out of the double boiler or whatever you've been using it in and set it on a table, and you don't have to worry about knocking it over. The number of times when I first got started in my current farm and I'd try and make cheese and nearly and lost a batch because I had only round bottomed bowls. It was kind of bad. So that nice flat bottom and the really deep sides. Oh, and I have Instant Pot there. Most Instant Pots will have a setting for pasteurization and yogurt making, maybe not for cheese making, but you can. I've been playing around with the temperature settings on mine and trying to figure out how to keep it at like a nice happy culture point for certain types of cheese. So I have a question mark there because they aren't always directly meant for cheese, but they could be. Okay, other comments coming in. Springform pans for cheese presses. That actually makes a lot of sense, yeah. All right. For folks who are wanting to try making cheese for their first time, this is what I tell them to do. Ricotta is the easiest cheese to make. Anyone can do it. I truly mean anyone, and you can do it with a gallon of milk, a gallon of cow milk from the store, even the homogenized stuff. Heat a gallon of milk to near scalding, 195 Fahrenheit, somewhere around there. Add about a quarter cup of an acid, apple cider vinegar, lemon juice, white vinegar, whatever you want. Apple cider vinegar is my favorite. Changes the different acids will change the flavor a little bit. You wait about 20 seconds and poof, magically it curdles right there in front of you. Drain it through cheesecloth and you can eat it straight like that. It is about as simple as it gets. It is a great way to just kind of use up a lot of extra milk if your animals are producing too much, because you can freeze it really well and it thaws and still is usable and delicious. Ricotta is like the perfect place for people to start. Side note, this is pretty much the same as queso fresco, except there, interestingly, you add the acid first and then heat it. I found that makes the curds a little bit smaller and finer, so slightly different texture than the ricotta. Chev, so your basic, soft, tangy goat cheese is kind of your next step up. And this is frankly about as far as my experience has ever gone. This is a mesophilic culture. So we want our milk warm, but not hot before we add these, the cultures to this one. The cool thing about Chev and its close cousins is that if you go out and milk your goat or your sheep, and you've got the milk in a jar or your pail or whatever, you come inside the house, you strain it, it's probably going to be right about the correct temperature. You don't have to heat it up again. It comes out of the animal just a little bit warmer than you want it. So this is nice as a quick, like, oh, I have an extra gallon of milk after I milked this morning, I'm going to just make some cheese with it. This is a cool one because the scientists and the companies that have been doing a lot of cheese making have started to get subcultures, if you will, or different varieties of bacteria to make different levels of or different flavors within the cheese. And so from New England Cheesemaking Company, the three I've tried the most are the Chev, the Fromage Blanc, and the Fromagina. And these are just different levels of tang, that sharp tang you'll get from goat cheese. And so I usually make, oh gosh, pounds and pounds and pounds of all three of these every single year. These also freeze decently well and thaw decently well. So this is another really simple way to get started. But you add your cultures to the warm milk, cover it up, let it sit in a warm-ish area. Most houses are fine. For 12 to 24 hours until you get the curd formed, then drain into cheesecloth and hang to your desired consistency, and then you can eat it straight from there. This one requires no aging, although you can age it to get a stronger flavor. On the left there is some Chev I tried to make yesterday. It's still too early in my goat's production cycle to really get the protein and fat levels right. I find that I have a really hard time making a good cheese until they've been in milk another probably couple of weeks, but I was trying. If you look, you can see it looks almost yogurty. This will probably be a nice drinkable yogurt or kind of kefir-ish sort of thing, but this wouldn't get me a nice solid curd. That photo on the right is from New England Cheesemaking Supply, and you can see the cracks in that curd and the kind of clear-ish way around it. So that's what you're really looking for. You're looking for that clean break in the curd rather than the kind of gloppy mess I've got on the left before you strain it. Hard cheeses follow the same basic starting. Get the milk to the right temperatures, add the cultures, wait for the curds to form, cut them and drain them. But then when you're doing, hard cheeses or aged cheeses, then you are putting them into molds and pressing them to get more moisture out of them. You're sealing them, and then you're salting them or brining them and letting them age for a while. And this is an area I haven't got into because it requires the ability to keep them at a specific temperature and humidity level for an extended period of time. And my house totally doesn't have that capability. I've thought about getting into it though, and I've heard that retrofitting or modifying wine coolers, wine fridges, and old refrigerators is a way to kind of keep that controlled environment. So that's something I want to get into, but I haven't gotten so far. Okay, this was, yeah, Adelina says wine fridge. That's what I've heard most often. And maybe one day I'll get there. Okay, that was a breakneck path through some cheese making. Here are my best links for resources. Because, like I said, I am not the pro at cheese making, but I've dabbled in bits and pieces of it. I know the science behind it. Here's where to go for the rest of it. I've referenced New England Supply or New England Cheesemaking Supply Company. I would say that is the place to go. Cheesemaking.com. They have recipes, they have articles on different types of cheese, they have tips and tricks, they have troubleshooting, and they have like every type of supply you can need. The wax, the cheesecloth, the cultures. Really phenomenal place. Highly recommend. Caprine Supply Company and Hamby Dairy Supply also market a lot of the equipment side of things, and they're also local-ish, at least for us in the central Midwest. Caprine Supply Company is in East Central Kansas. Hamby is in Northwest Missouri. So good companies to get some stuff from. And then if you are looking at going commercial with your milk or cheese operation, Missouri Department of Agriculture is the place to go there. And I will say, from my past experiences with Missouri Department of Ag, your best bet is to just call them up and ask questions, because even they acknowledge that the website is really hard to navigate. So go talk to them about it. For more of the animal side of things, these are my favorite recommendations for taking care of your animals and making sure that they're happy and healthy. So first is the American Association of Small Ruminant Practitioners. Their podcast, Boz and Bleats, is excellent. And the entire first season was on small ruminant dairying. So I learned a ton from that, even having been in this, like whatever I said, 30 years now. So I recommend that if you're interested in learning more about a lot of the medications and then some of the science behind how we ensure, good quality milk. They also have a tool to help you find a veterinarian who specializes in sheep and goats, or at least is willing to work with sheep and goats. And then to keep healthy animals, the American Consortium for Small Ruminant Parasite Control, wormex.info. And then if you're using, or if you and your vet are trying to figure out what medications to use on your animals, farad.org is where you get that information on drug residues. We have another recommendation coming in the chat, cheeseneeds.com. I'll have to check that one out. And Maria says, Ricky wrote the very first book on how to make cheese. Either I have that book or my mom has that book, and it's phenomenal.
I would like to go to the other two polls. I think I missed the time to go through, but I think it's very interesting. I will be giving this one. Why are sheep and goats milk more easily digested than cow's milk? I found, Margaret, that right now they are selling some milk that they call A2 from cows. And I found that most of the milk from the small ruminants are A2 milk. That has some kind of one of the proteins. So and that is the idea, that the protein I think most of the people is answering. So that is the idea. Do you want to give the feedback?
Yeah, so I actually need to read up more on the that A2 casein type status with goats. I know that they're doing more and more research on it. The American Dairy Goat Association has been digging into that a little bit. So that might be part of it. Most people are right here. The different protein and fat types are what make sheep and goat milk more digestible than cow's milk. It's not the lactose. Sheep and goat milk has lactose and not a hugely different amount than cow's milk. So there are a lot of people who who are intolerant of cow's milk assume it's lactose, because we've all heard of lactose intolerance. So they assume when they can't tolerate cow's milk, they assume it's the lactose. And those same people will try sheep or goat milk and discover they can tolerate it. And then they think, oh, it must be because they don't have lactose. Sheep and goat milk still has lactose. There are a number of people who are intolerant of the proteins or the fats in cow's milk, but not sheep and goat milk. So that's been an interesting educational struggle.
Yeah. And so here is the last questions. Which of the following might be true for a dairy sheep? It's a tricky question.
Yeah, I just made up a bunch of numbers there, but most people are on it. Number or letter B, choice B is the correct answer. So relatively small milk yield per day, but all sorts of butterfat in that milk.
Did you
Um,
have any resources for like milk line cleaning
I'm seeing
protocol?
Erica. Yeah, I'm seeing Erica's
Okay.
question. Erica, I will be honest, I am just doing exactly what my milking machines manufacturer said. And I'll be straight up honest, I'm not loving it. I see like films kind of starting to build up in some of my milk lines. And so the protocol that I've been following is rinse with kind of cool water first, then a detergent that they recommended, and then a bleach rinse. And not every time, but every now and again, like running kind of a brush through it. They sell like kind of bristle brushes on chains that you can actually pull through the milk lines. I'm not loving those as like long term. I'm not seeing the sort of cleanliness that I'd really like. So I think what my long term protocol is going to be is probably replacing my lines every couple of months to a year. Yeah, so I don't have as good of an answer as I'd really like. I think it's a good. I think starting with the manufacturer recommendations is probably a solid way to go, but I have not gotten an answer I really love. I will say, growing up, we had a different milking machine, and the process was water rinse, hot water with detergent, and then an acid rinse. And so I wonder if it's just different, like, is your water hard or soft? So I may switch to trying an acid rinse, even though it's not like the manufacturer's recommendations. I may go after that and see if that helps get rid of some of the buildup.
Okay, do we have?
Cheers to Jasmine for having a dough kid. That sounds like me on my staff meeting last week. I delivered a kid while I was on staff meeting. It was awesome.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Gabriel.
Yeah, so before we let everybody go, I just wanted to and we wanted to thank everybody, of course, for being here, especially you, Margaret. We really appreciate you. But we also really appreciate all of our attendees, and we wanted to invite anyone who's willing to maybe write a few sentences, 2 or 3, maybe 4 sentences about how these webinars and some of the resources you've gotten through Lincoln has positively affected you or your farm in some positive way. So if that's something that you're interested in at all, we would definitely greatly appreciate that. You just want to write a few sentences and send it to us in an email or something along those lines. We would really like having some information from all of you about how we can see we just want to see some of the change that we've created possibly, and hopefully have some feedback to create some better programs for you guys in the future. So if anyone's interested in that, we'd really appreciate it. Also, I wanted to let everyone know, as far as the certificate goes, we wanted to just recognize a few people. There's actually quite a few people, but recognize those of you that have followed up and gone back and watched some of these older videos so that you could be considered for the certificate. We just really appreciate the interest that all of you have shown in our webinar series. Anyone who would like to be considered for the certificate, we will give you guys the next 2 months for you to go back, watch videos that you may have missed that should be on our YouTube page, and then we can send you your certificate.
Okay, thank you, Gabriel, and thank you, Margaret. Thank you for the people. Margaret Chamas just share her presentation in the chat, so you can go over there and download. And we are just closing our winter certificate with the 12 speakers that we had during this winter. And thank you for everyone that came here. Thank you, Margaret. And for sure, we are going to invite you to be talking about the other topics that you are experts also. So thank you so much. And well, the time just flies. And I say thank you. And we are going to keep in touch with you.
Thanks for having me on. Happy kidding season, everybody.
And yeah.
Yeah, thank you all.